Hello, welcome. This is Nick Murray, Policy Analyst with Maine Policy Institute, and we have a quick breakdown of last week's legislative session and the issues that are happening today in Maine politics. I'm joined by Jacob Posik, our Director of Communications here at Maine Policy Institute. Jake, welcome. Thanks for joining me to talk about this. We had some movement on a couple different issues. But if you could just mention what happened with the state of emergency declaration, the joint resolution that the legislature dealt with last week.
Yeah, so there were two different joint resolutions in the legislature last week. The House version of the resolution was introduced by Representative Peter Lyford. He actually signaled a few months back that he was going to introduce such a resolution in the legislature. Unfortunately, our lawmakers have not been meeting in person. They've been holding public hearings on a lot of bills unrelated to the state's virus responses. You know, Governor Mills still unilaterally has full control of the state of Maine right now. So Rep. Lyford signaled that he was going to introduce that. He did, in fact, introduce that, and lawmakers held a formal vote on it when they met in person last week at the Civic Center. The outcome in the House was not quite what we wanted it to be, but we did earn the support of 3 independent representatives who joined Republicans in support of that. In the Senate, Senator Rick Bennett introduced the Senate version of that resolution and argued in favor of it. Interestingly, there were some Democrats who also supported it. Namely, Senator Dave Mearman gave a great floor speech in support of the resolution. Ultimately, it did go down as well, but it was a much closer vote. So both of those resolutions, unfortunately, did not succeed. But I think the governor can tell by the support from independents and Democrats that her days with emergency powers are likely numbered, and she needs an exit strategy sooner than later, I think.
Here's hoping. We're still working on that. We'll have an update for folks later on in this video, but I wanted to talk about something else that happened last week. Legislators were up until nearly 2 a.m. on Thursday night dealing with the supplemental budget, which really only funds the state of Maine government through this June, the end of this June, dealing with this fiscal year. So Governor Mills and the legislature were in fierce negotiation over that. Republicans on the Appropriations Committee had signaled that they wouldn't support anything less than full tax conformity with the federal government. That refers to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed at the end of 2017. But the real sticking point of that was whether businesses who received Paycheck Protection Program loans from the Pandemic CARES Act, whether they would be taxed on those loans. So Republicans had drawn a line and said that they wanted full conformity for all of those loans. Governor Mills had initially proposed a compromise that would only leave taxation for up to the first $1 million. So that would have taken care of most of those businesses. But as we had mentioned in the weeks following or preceding this, these are for Maine employees. These are businesses that employ Mainers. They're based here in Maine. And so all of these businesses had received this money through the federal government, and the federal government had meant for it not to be taxed. So we were clear that it was really important for our recovery and the response to the pandemic that these businesses not be taxed on this. Ultimately, the legislature did find a compromise on that. They have no income taxes on 100% of all PPP loans, as well as the first $10,200 of unemployment benefits. So those businesses that received aid from the federal government via the CARES Act, as well as the folks who had been on unemployment, which we know that the system here in Maine has had big problems. Those folks who received unemployment benefits up to $10,200 will also not be taxed on that, just as the federal government had intended. So looking at back to last week, you know, it was crazy. The legislature met for 2 marathon days and they got through these 2 big things. Jake, what are we looking forward to from today, which is the 1-year anniversary of Governor Mills' state of emergency to COVID-19?
So I mean, the hope is that she will terminate it. The last time that she renewed this state of emergency declaration was on February 17th. So she has just a few days left to make a decision on if she wants to extend it. Personally, I think it's time for it to go. You know, the governor has had this emergency power in place for more than a year. Unfortunately, I don't think that's probably going to happen. And the reason why is that she had signaled just a couple weeks back on her, reopening 2.0 plan. And she has capacity limits set in place going as far into the future as May 26th, I believe the date is. So for her to keep those rules in place, she would need emergency power to issue orders to force Mainers to follow those. So I'm certainly hopeful that the governor sees the writing on the wall, but there's obviously no guarantee. So what we want to do, Nick, really is just keep the momentum going. For last week, we got over 1,100 Mainers in about 96 hours to contact our elected officials.
Wow.
Every single district was represented in that, at least one message going to the lawmakers in these various districts. And so we want to keep that momentum going. The legislature will reconvene in person again sometime soon anyway, because they have to pass the next biennial budget for the state of Maine before the end of the current fiscal year on June 30th. So they will meet again in person, and there will be another joint resolution to end the state of emergency. If lawmakers aren't going to meet in person and conduct the people's business in public, when they do meet in person, we're going to ensure that they're going to vote on whether or not the governor retains those emergency powers. And hopefully on our second bite of the apple, we'll get better results.
Yeah, I agree. It's so crucial to get legislators on record for this. And if, all but 3 of the Democratic caucus are going to endorse a year-long state of emergency as of last week, we're prepared to put that question in front of them. So I know we have plenty of allies in the legislature who will put that forward. So looking forward to seeing the response to that next time as we enter the next year of state of emergency here. So just to sort of wrap up, Jake, you mentioned that the legislature will come back and negotiate on the biennial budget. That's for the budget that begins this July and goes through the next 2 years. So that's funding state government for the second 2 years of Governor Mills' first term. Her first budget raised spending about 11%. And so I think we saw some of the issues with sort of spending every possible bit of revenue once we hit this recession and this economic slump. So looking at the the next federal spending bill, the American Rescue Plan Act, Maine is slated to get another $1.5 billion over the next 8 to 10 years to deal with this. But we're releasing a report on the budget. We're sort of scouting out the economic scenario, the budgetary scenario, so folks can find our analysis on that biannual budget at mainepolicy.org. The report is called Long-Term Growth or Short-Term Gimmicks. So you can find that on our website. But we're looking at a lot of different tax bills, a lot of bills in the legislature this session to raise taxes either on income, on dividends, on corporations. It seems like there's no area of the tax code that legislators can't find some more money. But when we're looking at this, we're seeing extra injection of spending coming into Maine. And we're not sure if there's even really any need for any more spending. And so you'll find in our report that we found a lot of places that legislators could cut. It's probably unlikely that they will have some super sharp cuts this year based on that next batch of revenue coming in. But I think it's safe to say that these bills that are going to raise taxes probably aren't going to go anywhere this session. Like you mentioned, Jake, to me a couple weeks ago, they might hold these over till next session. But in terms of getting through this biennial budget negotiation, there really isn't a need, and there really isn't any room in the negotiations for adding more revenue. So are you seeing that play out today as well?
Yeah, I do. To be honest with you, I'm not sure, how they're going to reconcile that really. But with this giant infusion of federal cash that's coming in, it's hard for me to wrap my head around why they would need any more money for Maine people. And of course, what people need to be aware of moving forward is just exactly how these federal funds are being spent. If we're going to spend $1 billion more at the state level, state government can't be, 15, 20% larger when those funds run out, because then us, the hardworking taxpayers of the state of Maine are going to be left to foot the bill. So I think that's really where the focus goes now as it relates to the budget and this big infusion of federal cash we're set to receive.
That's exactly it. We have to make sure government doesn't grow because of this extra injection of money. But that's why we do what we do here. We're here to save Maine people from higher taxes and more onerous regulation, and really to get this economy back moving again, because we can't just budget for the next 2 years or when the next federal bailout comes. We have to budget and plan for the economy for the next decade plus, because that's the sort of situation we're in with this slump that happened this year. So Jake, thank you so much for joining me to talk about this. I hope folks found this useful and interesting, and folks can find more information about what we do at Maine Policy Institute at our website, mainepolicy.org. Like I said, look out for our budget report, long-term growth versus short-term gimmicks. And hopefully we'll be back again with some more updates on what's going on in the session. Thanks for joining me, Jake.
Yeah, take care.